An urban wild is a place where nature has taken over, but not out someplace in the wilderness, someplace here where we live, right around us. Maybe in the city, maybe someplace that you don't quite think of as being the city, more in suburbs, but importantly, where people live. So it's nature where you don't expect it, or as I say in the title of my book, it's accidental. So, accidental nature, what does that look like? It usually looks like rampant vegetation that no one is maintaining. And it looks like it's not supposed to be there. Like it's there because it's escaped human control. I call it in my book, Design by Deficit, neglect. As a matter of fact, the full title of the book is Design by Deficit, Neglect, and the Accidental City. And urban wilds are a big part of neglect and the accidental city. The kind of vegetation you usually see in them is things like tall grass, lots of weeds, whatever weeds mean to you. In this part of the country where we have a wetter climate, you also very frequently see tall shrubs in them. So by that I mean shrubs that come up above eye level, often well above eye level, up 10 to 15 feet. That's vegetation you can't see through, and that's really important in how we think about and how we behave around urban wilds, as I'll talk about in a while. They may also include canopy trees, which are shade trees, big trees, but they don't have to. So they don't all have all these kinds of vegetation, but vegetation that is unmaintained, that is out of control, that is wild, is key to what an urban wild is. We also see in urban wilds signs of disorder. That's what I call it in the book, signs of neglect. What that means is there are signs that no one is paying attention to what happens there, that you can get away with doing things in an urban wild. And that has some interesting implications. What I mean by that is that there are signs that people are using this space, this kind of leftover, forgotten space. People are using it, but not in a way that's probably officially sanctioned or authorized. So that can be very playful ways. That can be ways that are outright criminal. And that can be a lot of things in between that are ambiguous. Urban wilds are ambiguous spaces. So when we think about this, there may be a place that's occurring to you in, as I describe this, a place you're thinking, that sounds like the spot that I see every day. But maybe not. A lot of you look like you're thinking, no, I don't know what she's talking about. So let's think about this a minute. Do you know an urban wild? I'm telling you, you do. If you look at the next slide here, I have my typology of urban wilds. This is a number of categories that urban wilds tend to fall into. And right at the top is vacant lots. I put that one at the top because vacant lots, we can all think of a vacant lot. If you just think for a minute, I'm sure you can come up with a vacant lot. And what you imagine, vacant lot, is a pretty good depiction of an urban wild. But it's not the only kind, and you can see the other types here. Importantly, they are not all land that has been abandoned. We'll talk about that a little more. But what matters with them is this, and this is the first really interesting thing about urban wilds. We are very good at not seeing them. As a matter of fact, you could kind of define an urban wild as a place that isn't really visible to us. So this just got more interesting if we're talking about invisible places, right? So what I mean by that is this, that urban wilds are places where neglect is allowed to pile up. This is a phrase I use in the book over and over again, that neglect piles up. And what that means is that where one thing is allowed to go wild, there tend to be other things that are allowed to go wild because they're places that we don't really notice. And I think of this a little bit like places in your house where clutter piles up. It's kind of like that, but at a city scale. So it's the same idea, but just bigger. And we kind of collectively as a society are not paying attention to what's going on over there, or decide that we don't really value it enough to take care of it, or it's the end of the to-do list. Like, we know we should clear off that table. We know we should mow that forgotten utility corridor, but we don't actually do it because time is scarce. Something's always at the end of the to-do list. And that is the deficit I talk about in the title, Designed by Deficit. It's designed by unintended consequences, designed by everything we don't get to. So I want you to think about this. Now that we've talked a little bit about urban wilds, I challenge you this week. Look at places that you pass in your everyday life. So maybe this is your commute to work. Maybe this is on the way home from school. Maybe this is on the way to the grocery store or the laundromat. It could be in your neighborhood. It could even be in your backyard. Look and see for a place that sounds like an urban wild, and I guarantee you, you will see one that you've never seen before. Because as I say, we're very good at not seeing urban wilds, but now you know how to see them. You may be thinking that, okay, I'm not too sure about this finding one in my backyard. This doesn't sound great. She said criminal. There's a lot of out of control going on with that. I'm not really sure that I want this near me. And as we'll talk about, urban wilds definitely have a downside, but they also benefit us. And that is a radical statement. So I am going to say that again. We are better off because of urban wilds. How? One of the big ways, a way that is of pressing concern, is that urban wilds increase our resilience to climate change. And that is of great interest to us. It's greater interest literally by the day. So how do they do this? Well, the big thing is about carbon sequestration. If you know anything about climate change, carbon sequestration probably rings a bell. And the reason why is because at heart, kind of the basic phenomenon that is climate change is about having too much greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, which acts like a blanket over all of us, over Earth, land, and sea. And just like a blanket, it's warming us down here. Greenhouse gases that form that blanket, carbon is a really important component of those in the most common greenhouse gases. So carbon sequestration means that you are keeping more carbon someplace else where it can't be released into the atmosphere. And if there's more somewhere else, there's less in the atmosphere, less carbon, less global warming. See, it's pretty simple. Well, how do you sequester carbon? How do you do this magic thing? One of the really best time-tested, infallible ways to sequester carbon is through vegetation. And one of the real key strengths of using vegetation to sequester carbon is this, that plants grow. We don't have to make them grow. We don't have to, pass laws to make them grow. We don't have to show up and do something to make them grow. At least, not the kind of plants I'm talking about. Not plants in urban wilds. They do their thing because we're not paying attention. They're growing because we're not helping them out. They're growing kind of out of sight behind your back. They're growing because of neglect. And because of that, because they act without us, they're really good for sequestering carbon. But there are also some other things about neglected spots, urban wilds, that make them especially good at sequestering carbon, even better than, say, a really mowed, maintained, neat and tidy lawn or park that you might picture as being, a beautiful outside space. Urban wilds are better at sequestering carbon than that is. Let me tell you why.